Happy Tuesday and welcome to another episode of Let's Start Justice. You recognize that we are 1 hour ahead. That's because Bridge 99 FM was kind enough to give us an extra hour to really delve deep into some of the issues that we are going to be discussing today. My name is Michael Jackson, Executive Director of JFJ.
And I'm Jade Williams, the Policy and Advocacy Specialist at JFJ.
Now, as I said earlier, we're going into a 2-hour segment for Let's Start Justice. It's just for 1 week, unless Bridge is nice enough to accommodate us for future. But we are certainly excited because there are some issues that we saw coming up in the news that we believe it's important to really delve a little bit deeper into. Conversations around the Integrity Commission, for example. I saw some commentary on social media. Jeanette Calder from Jamaica Accountability Meter Portal, JAMP, would have been engaging in some of those dialogue, but we will go into that. We're going to be touching on constitutional reform, importance of citizens' participation. But the main topic for discussion today, which will be coming up in the second half of the program, will be focusing on human trafficking with a particular focus on child trafficking issues. You think that's something that we normally take serious, Jade, human trafficking?
I think it's something that we're all still becoming more familiar with. So, no. But hopefully with the information and this program contributing to public education on the issue, we will take it more seriously in future. It is something that's affecting us greatly, though.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's see. So remember now, you can follow us on social media, on our Twitter accounts, Instagram accounts. You can be watching us live now on YouTube. And of course, Bridge really set them thing large. So you can actually go on the Bridge 99 website and keep up with what is happening right now. And of course, Radioland traditional media is still there where you can tune into 99 FM. Remember, you can also call our student lines at 676-4996 and WhatsApp us at
239-7583.
All right, perfect. So news of the week, let's start light.
Okay.
No, I'm not a sports person at all, but I would have been keeping touch and up to date with what is happening. And typical Jamaican, we bandwagonist on certain things at certain time of the year. So I would have been watching what was happening. And of course, Shelley and Fraser Price and Sherika Jackson kept the country proud, right? And I think Sha'Carri Richardson shocked us with that gold win for the 100-meter sprint.
Honestly, Michael, I wish I could converse with you on this. I'm not that familiar.
Not that familiar?
No.
But Sha'Carri, you know, the typical thing where Jamaica and US, we would have had a little adversarial relationship when it comes to race and the sprint in particular. So Sha'Carri shocked us and she got the gold, but apparently she has done a little renewal when it comes to how she reacts in the public. So some Jamaicans are willing to adopt her. But we have to say, Shelley and Fraser Price, you have surpassed even the great Usain Bolt. You're a legend in your own right. You have amassed some 15 medals. So kudos to Shelley, and the country is so proud. Such a humble person.
Yes. And
Sherika Jackson got the silver. And, you can rely on Sherika as well. Hansa Parchment got a silver for his race, and of course you can also rely on him. So we're so grateful for the efforts of the Team Jamaica, who are in Budapest for the World Championship. So big up on yourself.
Well, I'll just say, I may not be a track fan, but our netball team did us very well at their World Championships, as well as our football team that went all the way to the quarterfinals in the Women's World Cup. So we've been doing well in sports, I'd say.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And, the reason for starting with that, we as a country, sometimes you open the newspaper for those who actually have the print. I open a website. But sometimes when you look at those headlines, it's disheartening. It's frightening. And you wonder, what type of Jamaica are we living in terms of the crime levels and so on. So when you see good news, you obviously must celebrate. And before we go into some of the topics, another thing that really happened last week. It's a JFJ initiative. For those who have been following our social media and for those who would have seen us in the streets, we were in Mandela Park last Friday in the afternoon before the rain started. And though we didn't get to really see the end of the initiative that we had planned, which we're going to be rescheduling, we were out there for about 2 hours. And this is a community intervention, our Justice Tour. For those who have been following JFJ, last year we launched our Justice for All campaign. And the Justice Tour is a part of that campaign, which is really seeing us in the communities, talking to citizens, explaining their rights. For this particular initiative, it was focusing on gender-based and domestic violence. And Jade, you remember any of the issues that you heard persons raise inquiries about that jumped out at you?
Yeah, well, one of the reasons that we're even doing this is just access to information and access to justice. I know that several times people exclaimed, looking at the materials that we would have provided for them, pamphlets and so. I didn't know this was something that I could do. I didn't know that this exists here. So I think that remains to be one of the challenges with access to justice, is just knowledge.
Yeah.
That it exists and that there is support out there. So I think that we made good strides in that. As much as we didn't get the time, we made good strides in getting information out there. And I do think we kind of strengthened our partnership with the JCF, who was also
the Domestic
present.
Violence Intervention Center.
Yes, and I did see their officers engaging with the persons that came to our booth as well. So I think in tandem, dealing with the criminal side, us dealing with the victims, getting them additional support. It's a good initiative, and we will be continuing with our interventions in that vein. Yes.
And just to point out, the Jamaica Constabulary Force established the Domestic Violence Intervention Centers. You would have seen Jacqueline Dillon on the program before, who is in charge of the DVIC. And part of it is for the police to be sensitized about domestic violence matters. And in being so sensitized is to ensure that you have an ability, infrastructure, institutional support to respond to individuals as they raise their concerns and so on. So very good work from the JCF. And JFJ continued that effort with a partnership that we have established with Megamart. So yesterday we were by Megamart in Montego Bay, the team. How was that one?
It was good. I think, again, we're seeing a similar trend of persons not knowing that the information is out there. I know that we met up with at least 2 community leaders that just stopped by the booth, let us know that they need copies of our Know Your Rights booklet. They need copies of our domestic violence guide or gender-based violence guide. So I think we are not only engaging with the public, but also potentially building partnerships with community leaders out there.
Great.
Yes.
And, for us at JFJ, we really believe in just going into the communities, speaking to people. It's important because there were some other matters that arose while we were there, especially in the halfway tree for me, because I wasn't in Montego Bay with the team. But in halfway tree, and I'm calling on the Ministry of Justice, perhaps, the expungement exercise that the Ministry of Justice is undertaken, such an important initiative, wherein for certain offenses that individuals perhaps would have been convicted of, I believe, you will see the possibility of it being expunged, where it's written off your record. That's correct?
Yes, that's right.
Now, we've had many people calling JFJ asking, because sometimes they mix us up with Justice Ministry,
yes.
or they just want some information. But one of the concerns we have to the Ministry of Justice team, Minister of Justice, the Honorable Delroy Chuck, is timeline. Persons are apparently being told that it takes up to a year. I don't know if this is the case, but we've gotten certain communication in that regard. Persons are unsure of the types of matters
exactly, yes.
that are have the possibility of being expunged. And again, beautiful effort from Justice Ministry. One of the things perhaps JFJ would have to do is to reach out to the Ministry of Justice so that if people call the office as they have been doing, we are better equipped to perhaps just give very brief information so that they are more empowered in terms of what to do. Does this fit the criteria? But I would urge the Justice Ministry to do a little bit more public education on the expungement process so people are aware of what to expect in terms of the timeline, again, the types of matters that could be expunged and so on. So
Yes.
just wanted to flag that for the Justice Ministry. All right.
All right.
So you have your trivia, Jade?
Oh, yes, I do have my trivia. If Kevin could pull that up for us. I didn't know we're doing it so early, but let's go. So our trivia question for today is in relation to our second half topic, which is about trafficking in persons. And the question is, when did Jamaica ratify the protocol to prevent, suppress, and punish trafficking in persons, especially women and children? So that's the full name of the protocol, but it's also called the Palermo Protocol. So if you answer that correctly through our social media pages or through our WhatsApp at 2397583, then you know that you can win a credit from the network of your choice. And let's just do the right of the day right now. So our right of the day is coming from the same instrument where I'm asking you when we ratified it for trivia. And it states that each party, state party should consider implementing measures that provide for the physical, psychological, and social recovery of victims of trafficking in persons, particularly appropriate housing, counseling, and information as it relates to their legal rights, medical, psychological, and material assistance, and employment and educational and training opportunities. So that would be one of our obligations as a state that would have ratified that instrument.
All right, great. So before we head to the break, let's just summarize what we're going to be discussing up to 1 o'clock. Now, the matter of the Integrity Commission, it has been in the news for some time now. For those who are not aware, the Integrity Commission Act is currently being reviewed by a joint select committee of Parliament. This is a bipartisan committee that is so established to go through a piece of legislation to see what the issues are, what areas perhaps need to be strengthened, what areas perhaps need to be repealed, general amendments. The Integrity Commission Act was drafted in 2017, and I think it came into official effect in 2018. Right? We have been seeing other issues coming out in the news where 28 public officials are currently being investigated by the Integrity Commission for illicit enrichment. So in other words, however you get your money, it's from a source that can't be substantiated based on your levels of income. And there may be evidence to suggest that whether through conflict of interest or any other corrupt means, you have so enriched yourselves. You also have 6 parliamentarians who are similarly under probe. There have been calls for those 6 parliamentarians to be so named, publicly, that is. We're going to be clarifying JFJ's position. We're going to be speaking specifically on what due process means, urging us not to conflate the issues, and we're going to be clarifying the gag clause, because I see some confusion on Twitter about the gag clause versus this special report that is so permissible under Section 36 of the Integrity Commission Act. And if you remember, Jade, when we were in Parliament making our submission, it was the Minister of Legal and Constitutional Affairs, and I've also heard the Justice Minister raising, why are we concerned about the gag clause when Section 36 is there? Mm-hmm. And from our perspective, Section 36 makes no such allowance for certain matters to be made public. So we're going to be having that discussion, And I hope that other media colleagues who are watching would be so guided as you also go through your own programs, because it is important that we're aware of what the law allows as we facilitate dialogue on a matter that is of national importance. All right, so we take the break and then we return. All right, welcome back to Let's Start Justice. We are talking Integrity Commission Act, the Integrity Commission itself, the matter of the gag clause. And let me borrow Arthur Hall's headline, Jade, the mysterious six, that was on the front page of the Jamaica Observer. And I'm not sure if you had an opportunity to read the Jamaica Gleaner's editorial this morning.
Yes, I saw it.
Which, oh boy. Last week, Jade, you would have been party to JFJ's press release that we wrote. And we called on the leader of the opposition, Mark Golding, and the Prime Minister to step to the public fore, say to the Jamaican people that while there is a gag clause at the moment, I have spoken to the individuals on my side of the aisle, and I have inquired, and these individuals, I am encouraging them to step aside from their parliamentary duties. Now, for those who are not aware, when we talk about parliament, it's not just the House of Representatives, which is the lower house where you have your 63 members of parliament. It is also the upper house where you have your senators. So currently in the House, which is the lower house, the People's National Party controls 14 seats, which means they have 14 members of parliament in the House. Mr. George Wright, following allegations of domestic abuse with a stool, he would have resigned from the Jamaica Labour Party, so he is an independent member, if you will. So you have 48 other members for the Jamaica Labour Party. In the upper house, you have 13 to the ruling party and 8 to the opposition. Now, Mark Golding and his members would have been on social media making their declarations that they have not been contacted by the Integrity Commission, which the Prime Minister in a public statement called it political gimmickry. The Prime Minister indicated that he has searched far and wide, and though he has not spoken to all of those on his side, none of those who he would have spoken to have so been contacted. So Gleaner wrote this article this morning.
Yes.
You remember the sentiment of it, Jade?
Yes, well, that's neither Mr. Golding nor Prime Minister Holness could be misleading the public in any manner, and therefore the commission must be misleading the public on the basis of their investigations, and that maybe these investigations are illegitimate, which...
And I think Gleaner was being tongue-in-cheek. Because like the Observer, clearly, who are these 6 people?
Yes.
Because, you know, and it's a couple of things, and I don't want us to be confusing to the listeners, but it's a couple of things. And I want to read from a segment of our press release. Jade, my eye is not working so well. If you could just read that section that Greg Christie wrote in his annual, why do I keep saying in the annual report of the Integrity Commission.
Yes, and the quote goes, "There is a what-if concern regarding the potential for a conflict of interest, which needs to be openly discussed in the public interest. It concerns the question as to what should happen if a parliamentarian who sits on the Integrity Commission Act Joint Select Committee or the Integrity Commission Parliament Oversight Committee should become the subject of an Integrity Commission investigation," which we may be dealing with the implications of that currently.
No, listeners, don't kid ourselves. I can't foresee the executive director of the Integrity Commission making such a statement in his remarks towards the annual report. That what if question. Unless
the potential has arisen already.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Now, let me clarify JFJ's call for those who sometimes, I think, in defending one's political party, we unfortunately reach a stage of being absurd in our criticism. Respectfully so. But I must say that. You have those perhaps who have been saying what JFJ is talking about with stepping aside because we have so elected these people in the House. Now, at no point in time, Jamaicans for Justice would have asked for any elected member in the lower house to resign as a member of parliament. But quite frankly, so maybe you should. There's an oath that you have taken that means that you must adhere to good governance. And though we did not make the call, maybe you should. But to clarify what our call was, the what if question that Mr. Greg Christie asked or posed, JFJ's position is very clear, and we said it last week. If any such member, that mysterious 6 that apparently can't be found, because maybe they're lost in the halls of the House of Parliament, it would seem, that mysterious 6 who knows themselves, what we're saying is, if you're in the lower house, declare yourself to your political party head, which would be the Prime Minister, the leader of the opposition, and so declare yourself to the House Speaker to say that I am stepping aside from being a member of the Oversight Committee of the Integrity Commission, and I am stepping aside from being a member on the Joint Select Committee. And if you're in the upper house, you say to the Senate President and your political party lead the same thing. Now, Jade, if you remember, the Oversight Committee functions and what it entails, it is chaired by Edmund Bartlett. And one of the concerns we had before was that that committee that is there to ensure that the Integrity Commission is being efficient in their duties and so on, they weren't meeting.
Correct.
Right?
Yes.
But they said they want to start meeting now to do something that raises eyebrows, where they said before any report is tabled before Parliament, make we look at it first now. And that is dangerous.
Yes.
So can you imagine if that mysterious 6, any of them were to be on that oversight committee, what the implications may be? But let's go to the Joint Select Committee now, Jade. You hear a minister, this was Minister Warmington, I believe. Remember the statement he made?
Yes, I
Remind us.
Minister Warmington, wow, he made so many statements, but he did make a proposal, which his proposal was basically to remove several of the protections and powers from members of the Integrity Commission that would prevent them essentially from fulsomely completing their duties, because it would allow for them to be prosecuted for completing those duties.
Can you imagine?
I cannot.
Public officials acting in good faith, and this is a recommendation coming from a minister who sits on the Joint Select Committee. And when you have, and we have said this, and JFJ shall repeat it, and we shall beat that drum until that final recommendation report from the Joint Select Committee is so tabled. We shall beat this drum until the Integrity Commission Act is so revised in a manner that is in keeping with good governance. So if we have to come on this platform every week and talk Integrity Commission, we shall. Because it cannot be that there is the possibility of one of this mysterious 6 is on this committee And you hear, you remember the comments? Lacking in integrity.
Yes. Several, even personal implications to members of the commission based on their professional history.
And misleading the public about what Mr. Greg Christie may have done as contractor general and what he can do now. Mr. Greg Christie is the executive director, and we're going to be going through some aspects of the Integrity Commission Act. But I think it's a dangerous set of statements being made.
Yes.
So JFJ's call is this, and I'm happy that the Gleaner wrote that editorial, because the Prime Minister in particular, and the editorial said it, unless Mr. Mark Golding was being lied to or maybe misleading the public, then we would be concerned. And for the Prime Minister, it's the same. But when you say you went far and wide and you only spoke to a few, that is sidestepping the issue, Mr. Prime Minister. Because to date, I don't know how many of that 48 you spoke with, how many of that 13 in the upper house you spoke with. And that is not in keeping with good governance. We're going to be taking the break, but Jade, when we return, I just want you to speak to the implications of this cabinet policy. That apparently no member of cabinet can speak to Integrity Commission. This is after they lambast the Integrity Commission. But apparently there is now a cabinet gag that exists that said we're not going to be speaking to the Integrity Commission matters. So I just wanted to hear your perspective on what you think those implications are of the Prime Minister saying no member of the cabinet, and by extension it would seem no member from his political party ought to be speaking on the Integrity Commission and the investigation. So I'm keen on hearing your thoughts on that matter. All right, we take the break.
Welcome back to Let's Talk Justice. We are doing I want to say special episode today. And so far we have been discussing some of the issues surrounding the Integrity Commission. I don't know how else to put it. But yes, some of the issues surrounding the Integrity Commission. Before the break, Michael was asking me, can you repeat your question for me, Michael?
The cabinet, I can only call it the cabinet gag clause that was so imposed by the Prime Minister, it seems, on cabinet members. It was announced by the Minister of Information, Robert Nestor Morgan, to say that no member of cabinet should be speaking on the Integrity Commission and its investigation. And it would seem, by extension, the members of the Jamaica Labour Party who may sit in the lower house and the upper house of Parliament. So I was asking your opinion on it. What do you think about that imposition?
Well, I find it interesting that it would come now. I think we've been reviewing this act for coming up to a year now. We made our submissions in, I think, September, October of last year. And we're coming up to that time again. And since that time, we've heard numerous opinions, statements in Parliament, in the news, in the committee meetings on the Integrity Commission from these cabinet members, many of which we have been the subject of discussion on our show because of the manner in which they're being made. Some of them are misleading, some of them are misinformation. So we've seen that happening. And while I don't want to say that nothing was said, we did have a statement from the Prime Minister prior.
He said, stop the cascas.
Yes, cautioning persons on the narrative surrounding the Integrity Commission at the time, which in my opinion did little to quell that conversation.
Well, right after, I think less than a week after, Senator Apker Fitz-Enley went in the Senate for his maiden speech, I believe, the first speech that he gave as a senator. And of course, he went on the attack.
Yes, that is so. So I find it interesting that now that the concern is that there are members of Parliament, possibly members of this cabinet, possibly that are involved in investigation from the Integrity Commission, that there is this gag, which, and we already know the Integrity Commission itself has a gag of its own.
I think It's a dangerous precedent,
Yes.
in my estimation, because collective responsibility is an important concept. We sit as a team at JFJ and we agree on issues. And you may not have 100% agreement, but you recognize that in this instance, perhaps majority rules would apply.
Yes.
And when you believe in a common vision, working towards a common goal, then there is that aspect of collective responsibility. But there is also a matter of conscience, doing what is right. And what is your loyalty and duty to the Jamaican people?
Yes.
Now, the reason for me saying that the gag clause is dangerous, I believe it threatens independent thought, and I believe it's a danger to accountability and transparency. Why would I say that? For other public officials, you are so guided by what is allowed or what could protect you from the Protected Disclosure Act.
Yes.
So if you see something untoward and you feel compelled to speak based on the public interest, then you disclose that and you may get the protection from the Protected Disclosure Act, which interestingly enough, the authorized body is the Integrity Commission.
Yes.
Now, when you suppress your cabinet members, it says to me that it is undermining transparency if someone felt the need to speak.
Absolutely.
And quite frankly, Mr. Prime Minister, while it is important, and JFJ did not call for anyone to be publicly named, I want to make that very clear. Maybe in stepping aside, you would have inadvertent disclosure. But quite frankly, for the public interest, I think that outweighs the possibility of an individual reputation being damaged, possibly. Right? Now, when you have people believing and feeling like they can't speak on issues, I think it's very problematic. I really do. Because if they have information, so to speak, how could they? And you know why it is further alarming? I'm not sure, Jade, if you know that cabinet is so protected where there are levels of accepted secrecy. And it is exempted for, I think, up to 20 years for certain decisions and so on, taken by the cabinet, exempted for 20 years from being disclosed through the Access to Information Act. I hope I'm getting my information correct. Up to 20 years, but I think it's under the Access to Information Act. If not that piece of legislation, it would be under the Official Secrets Act, which needs to be gotten rid of. Parliament at one point proposed that it goes up to 70 years. Can you imagine me dead, gone and buried before you know what was happening?
Yes.
The duppy would be the one hearing the news, not they alive, Mikkel. Can you imagine that?
I can.
So it is an unfortunate thing that was being proposed. As the attorney, Jade, and you can guide us through what due process means here. Because the Prime Minister said that naming these individuals would undermine due process. I didn't realize the matter was being adjudicated. It was before the courts. I don't know what due process we're talking about.
We've heard this argument quite a bit about the protection of reputations, and we've had several strong talking points.
Yes, but he mentioned due process specifically.
Yes,
which is an entirely different thing from even reputational damage.
Everyone, as we know, under our constitution, we have a right to due process, but due process would imply that there is a process outside of investigation, which investigation is not normally considered in the due process. When we consider due process under the Constitution, for example, we're usually talking about someone that has been arrested or detained, right? And that means that there is a clear inquiry as to whether or not you would have committed this offense, and that inquiry will be adjudicated by the court. Whereas when we are talking about simply the initial stage, we don't even know what stage of investigation, but the stage of investigation where no charges or implication of charges have been laid, I don't know that due process should be a part of this conversation. Unless, of course, we are going to be extending conversations to due process to do with regular crime as well. So where the police indicate that this person with their full name and the last place they were seen is a person of interest in this matter.
The regular Jamaican.
The regular Jamaican.
Me and you who have no parliamentary privilege.
Absolutely. Does this indicate an issue to do with due process as well? So if
I think it's a deliberate conflation of the issues.
I agree.
And I quite enjoy Gordon Robinson's articles, but I disagree with him on the matter of the gag clause. And I'm going to turn over to you, Jay, to explain it. Because as an attorney himself, he argues that the Integrity Commission should do their work and so do it quietly. And we agree. We do agree with that. Because I don't think you should go back to that era wherein we are in the media for every little thing. I think we have to be careful, right? And Gordon Robinson and others have argued that there should be some level of evidence, perhaps that would have sustained the charge before you go public. So if you can't sustain a charge, don't say anything. That's what he argues. And I want us to have a discussion on what that means in particular.
Well, I think about, for example, investigations by Indicom, for example. When you look at the report, maybe at the end of it, they could not have laid a charge. But there were many, many issues that arose throughout the investigation that are matters of public interest that the public needs to be aware of, as it would affect the way that they're able to
even
interact.
Impeachment process generally.
Absolutely. So I think that when we talk about what the work of the Integrity Commission, we can't think about just possible guilt or the possibility of laying a charge. What about all of those issues that arise in investigation that are affecting public interest that may not arise to laying a charge, sure, but will affect the way the public is able to interact with their elected officials or other public officials. So I don't think it is sufficient to say that there is that the lack of the ability to lay a charge is sufficient.
And I think people who make certain comments about due process, it's either it's deliberately conflating, misleading the public, or maybe they genuinely don't understand the process by which the Integrity Commission is so guided.
Yes. And
this is why I'm urging people to read the Integrity Commission Act. It's just 70 odd pages. It's not that long, right? And I enjoy doing interviews with Jeanette Calder. She's such a process thinker. And one of the things, even in our personal Twitter accounts, we've tried to educate the public on what it entails. Now, a Minister Jade, you know that you're asked to make your statutory declarations. What are your assets, your income, and so on, yeah?
Yes.
How many houses you have, for those who don't understand what asset mean, how much car you have,
yes,
who may have gifted them to you.
Stocks,
and
investments.
All of, your stocks at the different companies, yes? Now, when you put all of that together, the Director of Information and Complaints at the Integrity Commission would add it up and say, all right, me add up your assets, your expenses, and me add up your income. But the two now connect.
Yes.
Something out of whack right here, so. Explain yourself.
Yes.
So that director would then go to that individual and say, explain yourself. That individual would then have an opportunity to say, all right, Integrity Commission, me get little money over there, so but, me never realized me not give you this bank account.
Yes.
Here it goes. Or so this car, as somebody gifted to me, a family member, me turn 50, And from a big 5-0, then give me something.
Yes.
You have an opportunity to respond. It only goes to the director of investigation when your response don't make no sense.
Yes.
It don't hold no weight. So what perhaps occurred when the office of the contractor general was established, and I don't want to seem as if we're berating the contractor general, because we have to be careful too. There are processes in place. So even if it has not yet reached the stage for a charge to be sustained, there would have been an opportunity already for such individual to have appropriately responded.
Yes.
Now, we're not going to be saying that the Integrity Commission is infallible, which is why due process is important.
Yes.
But you would have gotten an opportunity to already respond. And the matter is so being investigated, perhaps because your response don't hold no weight. And if the Integrity Commission is misguided, I want to be clear that what JFJ, National Integrity Action, and so on would have recommended wasn't for the gag order to just be lifted and then the Integrity Commission dip on the media, Bridge 99, TVG and all over saying these were the 6 persons. No, we have not asked for that. What we have instead asked for was a discretionary clause that is in keeping with the New Zealand model. Yes. We're past the break, and again, I'll turn over to Jay because I know she was the one who is best positioned to speak on the New Zealand model in terms of, public interest and stage of investigation and so on. So when we return, we wrap up this conversation so you understand what exactly we were proposing. Hi, welcome back to Let's Start Justice. We're running through some discussions on the Integrity Commission issue that we have been seeing happening in the media. And before we went on the break, I asked Jay just to clarify our position on the Integrity Commission's gag clause, and JFJ's position that is also shared by the National Integrity Action and Jamaica Accountability Meter portal, that perhaps we should be looking at removing the gag clause. Well, not perhaps, we have called for it to be either amended or repealed. And what we have called for is a provision similar to what happens in other jurisdictions. And by the way, we have searched far and wide and we have not found any similar agency with any gag clause. I remember speaking to Professor Trevor Monroe, and he also said this on radio, that he would have had some dialogue with Transparency International, and they too were unable to find any similar agency with any similar gag clause. So when we looked at New Zealand, Australia, and so on, their serious fraud office, we believed that there were some provisions that perhaps we could adopt where the gag clause, again, it's either repealed or it allows for some discretion in how the Integrity Commission is able to disclose certain information at certain time. You remember the position, Jade?
Yes. So we, unfortunately, I don't have, because we had some secondary pointers that came from the Serious Fraud Office in New Zealand that supported this section of their Serious Fraud Act that I'm going to read now. But the act would have allowed for disclosures to be made. One, where the person consents, which is a normal provision that happens.
So in other words, when all of the People's National Party members and Minister Chuck, I believe, also said it wasn't me.
Right.
The Integrity Commission would have been so authorized
to say indeed.
Yes.
It was not, right? Because the person would have consented. They would be able to release information that is to some extent already available to the public, or parts of information that is available to the public. So that would be a part of their guidance. They would be able to release information that may be necessary to enact an effective prosecution. And they may also reveal information where there is proper interest in receiving that information. Now, what we had before was a guide as to what that proper information was. And unfortunately, I'm not finding it as I would have hoped to find it. But
there are some criteria that it met.
Absolutely. And so that was really the formation of our position, that hearing all of the concerns from our parliamentarians and others on the protection of reputation of some of our most important offices and officers, we suggested this middle ground where we would not have a gag clause per se, but a guidance as to what information can be disclosed to the public and when. And we had also made the recommendation for there to be some response or some public statement made should any earlier disclosure affect the reputational damage, and it ended up not panning out in the following investigation.
Okay.
Yes.
So in other words, just to ensure that we're on the same page, the New Zealand model, for example, it balances certain things.
Yes.
Public interest.
Yes.
So perhaps in this particular issue here, wherein the Integrity Commission Act is being reviewed, if in the public interest you have members who are being investigated, then the names could be so disclosed. And let me make it very clear. It doesn't have to be disclosed where every Jamaican knows.
Exactly.
It could be disclosed to specific individuals who are in a position to say, in the public's interest, based on this information from the Integrity Commission, you should step down from this particular position that you hold.
Absolutely.
So every Jamaican wouldn't necessarily know just specific individuals. Or in the public interest, all of Jamaica perhaps would know.
Yes.
And you also have another provision in terms of whether or not such disclosure perhaps would advance the investigation. Because, in some matters, it needs witnesses to come forward and so on. So you don't have to name an individual. That's another thing. It could be that the Integrity Commission say, I'm investigating a matter at the Ministry of Education, at the Ministry of National Security, whatever ministry, but no names are called. But this gag clause prevent them from naming anything at all.
Absolutely. And I will say that it's something that is outside of even our intellectual perspective. On our intervention yesterday, I spoke with two members of the public that would have seen our many statements on these issues arising related to the Integrity Commission. And they asked me to explain what does the gag clause say? What does it do? And we brought it up and they said, but this doesn't make any sense. When you are investigating something, how will I know that you are investigating it? If I know that there is information to be given, and I don't know anyone is investigating it, I'm not going to say, suppose that causes me detriment. So I think that there is a lot of necessity for the commission to be able to disclose that an investigation is happening in a certain realm or on a certain issue, because it does give the public confidence to come forward.
Can you imagine all of Parliament, the trust in Parliament has been eroded, because rather than saying these 6 persons are being investigated, even if you don't know the names, but you know that the Prime Minister, the leader of the opposition, them take charge.
Yes.
And these people perhaps, because keep in mind, no minister is elected. They're appointed by the Prime Minister. So they can be removed from those positions.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
But at the very least, the public would have confidence that, guess what? They're in charge and it's not all 63 and 21. Because that is the perception.
Yes.
But you know what I take? And this is something I want us to discuss quickly. We have been told that Section 36, which facilitates that Section 36 of the Integrity Commission Act. For those, I want people to go and read it. You can just pick up the act. You will see it on page 27. And it reads, the Commission may at any time submit a report relating to a particular matter which, in the opinion of the Commission, requires the special attention of the Parliament. And we have been told by ministers, and I see their supporters repeating this, that Integrity Commission can somehow submit this special report that can name certain things. I want us to be very clear. This section is being guided by the second schedule of the Act. And the second schedule of the Act outlines what can be in this special report, similarly to how it provides for the annual report.
Yes.
And I just want to read quickly a few areas. Contents of the annual report of the Commission, which is similar to the contents of the special report. Because remember, with legislation, which is something I had to learn over time, you can't read things in isolation. Yes. Sometimes you have to flip through about 10 different sections of the same act. Sometimes missing it to 10 different sections of another piece of legislation, a confusing process. So let me break it down for the listeners. It is linked to the second schedule or guided by that second schedule. And it says you can only talk about things like a general description of the matters. General. So you can't get specific. And it says, subject to the section 53, subsection 3, a general description of the matters investigated by the Commission. So in other words, section 36, that special report, can blow the gag clause section out of the waters. Yeah. It is still subjected to the gag clause.
Absolutely.
So I want people to be guided and read for themselves. But I take it a step further. If we were to heed to the legal seniority of those who have made such statement, that you can go to Parliament with this special report and say whatever you want, Integrity Commission, how would that fix the argument that they have made that reputational harm is the main concern?
Yes. Yes. And
you see how it don't make no sense? It don't hold water?
It is extremely circular in the argument.
And then if you have noted attorneys, because remember our position at JFJ, we're also guided by a team, senior lawyers included, to come up with our positions. And if there's a disagreement on this thing, why not fix it?
Yes.
If the Integrity Commission, who is going to be guided by law, is going to be testing that section 36, it's not in keeping with good governance. Because if in their understanding, they believe that the gag clause prevents them from noting certain things, and section 36 subsection 3 offers no relief. And if those noted attorneys who sit in the House believes otherwise, why not fix that anomaly?
Yes. And I think it is a point that actually arose during our oral submissions as well, where the Minister of Legal and Constitutional Affairs made that argument that Section 36 would be able to support the Commission in making disclosures. And we made the argument you just made, Michael, that if that is so, the confusion must be clarified so that the Commission can effectively do their work, which is not happening now in the public perception.
Yes, absolutely. And just to close out this conversation before we take the break, JFJ uses this opportunity again to reiterate our call, to renew our call that this gag clause ought to be repealed or amended in keeping with the earlier discussion. And lastly, we strongly reiterate our call that when you look at all of the things that the Integrity Commission and their commissioners and staff have been subjected to, it is in keeping with good governance that this Integrity Commission is so entrenched in the Constitution, so you don't see amendments to the legislation that governs them being easily revised, wherein there is the possibility of the Integrity Commission being weakened. Jamaicans, we have to stand up and we have to let our voices be known. And I hope from what we discussed on the program, you're a little bit more clear or clearer. My English teacher would have a fit just now on the issues, and we can have discussions. But we take the break and then we return.
Welcome back to Let's Start Justice. We are now in our normal segment. We just did 1 hour where we spoke about several issues, but many of them related to the Integrity Commission and the current process of the review of the Integrity Commission Act. So hopefully if you weren't able to join us for that section of the program, you can re-watch later on YouTube. We may be having some difficulties with the live stream, but we will definitely re-upload the episode for you all to be able to see. So now we go into our substantive topic for today, which is prevention, prosecution, and protection, human trafficking in Jamaica, and we'll be joined by several persons. Mrs. Ogilvie from the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions. She's a Deputy Director of Public Prosecutions. We'll also be joined by Ms. Audrey Budai, who is the Manager of the Trafficking in Persons Secretariat at the Ministry of National Security, as well as Mr. Warren Thompson, the Director of Children and Family Programs, Child Protection at the Child Protection and Family Services Agency.
All right, so let's get right into it. Trafficking in persons is the trade in persons for the purpose of forced labor, of sexual exploitation. And according to the National Task Force Against Trafficking in Persons, this crime is known to be the most underreported in the world. An estimated 25 million people are affected by human trafficking worldwide each year, including hundreds of Jamaicans. Between 2010 and 2016, 62 victims were rescued in Jamaica.
Now, the government of Jamaica have tried to fulsomely address the issue of trafficking in persons with our Trafficking in Persons Prevention, Suppression and Punishment Act. And the act has been amended several times, most recently in 2021, which removed the option of a fine as a punishment for certain severe offenses, such as the commercial sexual exploitation of children, and they increased the maximum fine for several other offenses under the act.
No, we have made great strides because we do have a Human Trafficking Act in Jamaica, and I believe it was amended several years ago. So we're going to be discussing those amendments and the implications. But what is interesting, in 2019 Trafficking in Persons report, which is produced by the U.S. Department of State, they acknowledge those significant efforts that I just mentioned. But there are some areas of concern that they also noted. For example, the slow pace at which other cases move through the courts, which also hampers the efforts to hold traffickers criminally accountable. They also mentioned that there was no mechanism to assign trafficking cases to judges in the courts for certain areas. They also mentioned that the government is encouraged or has encouraged victims to participate in investigations and prosecutions, but unfortunately, it did not allocate adequate human or financial resources to help those victims during the legal processes. So access to justice, therefore, has been a little bit denied because the victims do lack the incentives to serve as witnesses in trials, right? So several areas we're going to be discussing with the guests that we have on the call.
Are our guests with us? Okay, so I think we have two of our guests with us. We have Miss Ogilvie and Miss Budai as well. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
for
for
joining.
having me as well.
We appreciate you both taking the time out of your day. Ms. Budai, let me start with you. Can you just paint a picture for us in terms of what exactly is human trafficking? Because I think sometimes as Jamaicans and for those who may be listening in, they think it's just something that they see on TV.
Yes.
In the shows, like what that show named Taken.
Yes, like Taken.
So they think it's something that doesn't happen in Jamaica. So can you just explain and give us some context?
Okay, I thought you did very well in terms of the definition.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought you did very well. Thank you for having us, and we're really pleased to be on. And I thought you did very well because trafficking in persons, as you said, it involved recruiting and the harboring or transfer of human beings for the purpose of exploitation.
Mm-hmm.
So we see most trafficking here for the purpose of sexual exploitation or using the victim for labor such as domestic servitude. And I just want to pause here to say sometimes when we say domestic servitude, we're not just talking about labor or so on. We're talking about using persons and as a sex slave as we move through. So under the Jamaica Trafficking in Persons Prevention, Suppression and Punishment Act, it is also not necessary to prove any means of control, especially in cases involving children under 18. So we call it modern day slavery.
Yes.
Yes. You know, I think one of the things too, and I just want your perspective on it, is that trafficking is like something that happens outside of the country. Like you're taken from your country to another country. Is it something that can happen in your country, even a place as small as Jamaica? I know that the US is like a large country, so that would be clear there. But here where we're so small, is it something that happens within the borders of the country?
So one of the reports you mentioned, and we ourselves have found that Jamaica is seen as a source, a transit, and a destination country. And you're totally correct again, because the term trafficking may suggest movement of some kind, but it does not require movement of any kind of physical movement. And a person can be trafficked without ever changing their location. We know people and children and families who are trafficked right in their household, right where they are, right in the little village, the community, and so on. So it really refers to the buying and selling of a person, and maybe generally understood as the exploitation. Exploitation is quite central, right, of one person or more individuals for the benefit of another.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Miss Budai. So I wanted to move to you, Miss Ogilvie. What are some of the challenges that would arise in addressing this issue coming from the Office of Public Prosecutions? How do you manage trafficking matters? What are you looking for to bring a matter to a successful end?
Right. Thank you again for having me. Some of the challenges that we experience as prosecutors is securing the attendance of the victims to give evidence against their trafficker. There are several issues that these victims experience in coming to court, whether it is fear, whether it is challenges, financial challenges, depending on where they're coming from, as well as, just returning back to their trafficker. We don't know what tends to happen outside of court, but, there are times when, victims are called, to come and give their evidence, and they refuse to attend. When you're trying to get through to them, you can't. Sometimes it is influence from other family members or even persons from their communities. So those are some of the challenges that we experience in respect of our victims in coming to court. However, we do have several means by which, the victims or the children to trafficking or adults could be protected. Thankfully, the legislation had been amended for these offenses to be tried by judge alone, as opposed to before a jury. So that is one form or type of protection, because oftentimes jurors are not able to appreciate the nuances of this type of what one would call modern day slavery. As well as when victims are able to, appreciate that there is restitution. This is post-trial if the trafficker is convicted. Restitution also can be paid to victims from any property belonging to the defendant. There's also access to counseling. There is a special unit within the Jamaica Constabulary Force, as well as counselors from the Victim Services Division are made available. And so as prosecutors also, where we are supposed to make every effort also to ensure that there is proper victim management. So the moment a matter is brought before the court, we to stay in contact with the victim and just to ensure that the victim is comfortable in respect of the success rate or what it is that we would need to prove. We would need first and foremost our victim to be present in court. Though the law does allow for paperless trials, there are certain thresholds that we would need to be certain we'd have to meet certain requirements in order for a matter to be tried without the actual victim.
Okay, I understand. So, I hear a lot of what is required to support a victim. And I want to just quickly move to Mr. Thompson. I do have more questions for you, Ms. Gilby, but I just quickly want to move to Mr. Thompson. When we talk about children as victims of trafficking, what, if any, support does your office offer? And how do you fit into that process of bringing the matter to trial and getting redress for that victim?
All right. Good afternoon to you and to your listeners.
Yes.
I want to say that I think it's a very good question. Also, because I am currently serving as chair of the Protection Subcommittee of the National Task Force Against Trafficking in Persons. Now, as you know, the Child Protection and Family Services Agency is the entity with responsibility for children, particularly children who are in need of care and protection. And of course, a child victim of trafficking is a child in need of care and protection. So our agency provides support in terms of housing. If the child has to be removed from either their own home or the child is recovered from the site of his or her exploitation.
Yes.
We also provide social and psychotherapeutic support. So we have children who are victims of trafficking who are provided with counseling services and in fact any other kind of service, whether it's we have to attend to their medical needs if they have medical needs. I mentioned psychotherapeutic support.
Mm-hmm.
So, the child will have experienced trauma and would need to be seen by a psychologist. So we provide that kind of service. And I'm sure you'd have heard that we recently opened our own child therapeutic center, which would serve definitely as one of the sites where that kind of support is provided. We also provide support in terms of education and preparation for reintegration. So depending on the age of the child, once the child comes into our care, we have to do the permanency planning. If the child can return home, that means returning home will not cause the child to be further at risk of harm, or will not be returning the child to the site of his or her exploitation. Then we work with the child and family for that family reintegration. Where that is not possible, and we would have brought the child before the court for being in need of care and protection and would have received a court order, then we can put that child in a foster care placement, and then of course when we talk about preparation for integration, depending on the age of the child, we're looking at educational support. It may mean skills training. It may mean going into our transitional living program, so that child, on becoming an adult, is able to successfully transition to independent living. So, depending on the age at which the child comes in, we provide the services that are needed to support that child's well-being, of course, but ultimately the child's reintegration into society or community. And I say reintegration, but you'll appreciate that sometimes we have children who are not from this jurisdiction, who on becoming adults may choose to remain in the jurisdiction, and we have to support their integration into the community.
Okay, so when you speak about the kind of support that is offered for children where the child is not, where the home is not the place that the trafficking is happening. As you said, the child can return home without detriment.
Right.
Is there support for those parents who will have to manage whatever
Yes.
traumas the child would come home with
Yes.
from that experience?
Definitely. So we work closely with the Victim Services Division to have families, parents in particular, understand the impact of the trauma that the child have experienced. And then, it's a kind of a hand-holding process, because you appreciate that while the child is at home, there's still a court case going on,
Yes.
possibly concerning the alleged offender.
Yeah.
And as such, the Victim Services Division works with us to carry the child through that process. Just last week, I was having a conversation with a victim who, well, recently became an adult, actually.
Yes.
And the query was about the court case. And the victim was saying, I don't want to go back to court. So as social workers, we have to hold their hands through that process. And a part of that is holding the family's hands, because sometimes the family, they don't understand the impact of trauma, and and the extent to which it would also affect their functioning. And I'm saying this because I have a victim of trafficking who was recovered at about age 16, and that victim's exploitation began many years before. Now, when we actually had to request that a psychological assessment be done for that victim, including a psychoeducational assessment.
Yes.
And when the assessment report came back, that child was functioning at way below her level.
Yes.
And of course, I'm not using the scientific means of saying this, but my conclusion was that it was almost as if the child stopped growing at the point at which the exploitation started to occur. So many families won't necessarily understand that, so we have to work with the family to get an appreciation of the way in which the exploitation impacts the child's cognitive development, would have impacted the child's educational progress, and just the child's social function in general. So it's about working with the family to get that appreciation. So, the Victim Services Division does a lot of that work where the children remain at home. And of course, we work with them in terms of preparing the children for court, and also exploring, reintegration when the children come into our care.
Okay, so thank you so much for that.
Sorry, I've said that a lot. Sorry.
Yeah, no, but that's some good information, because it really allows us to kind of put in our perspective where persons are receiving the support that is necessary for us to kind of eradicate this issue. I wanted to go back to Miss Budai. I heard when we spoke to Miss Ogilvy on the bringing the matters through the court, there was a lot of support that was necessary for victims in particular, but I wondered about witnesses. JFJ is no stranger to critiquing the witness protection support that we currently have, and I wonder what, if any, gaps, what if any additional improvements might be coming to that scheme to assist in getting not only victims but other witnesses to these issues to court and participating in the legal process. Ms. Budai?
All right.
Yes.
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me well?
Yes, I'm hearing you now.
Okay, great. Whilst I was listening to the other speakers, I realized that we say among ourselves that trafficking in persons have certain nuances. So it's no straight line in terms of how, especially like Dr. Thompson was explaining, not even child victims, you have that straight line in terms of how you handle and deal with these situations. One of the gaps we really see, and it was mentioned in some of the reports, and we also take that under advisement, is that the time frame that it takes sometimes to go through the prosecution, because we all know, JFJ, know that the numbers of other things that's happening in the country before the court, how the case can be long. So we have had to be doing a lot. I think Dr. Thompson mentioned it again, and also Mr. Gilvey, the relationship that you have to keep going on with either children or adults, whomsoever they are, once they are victims of trafficking. So that is also a big challenge for ourselves who are, working on the ground and in the field. So that is also a problem. We also have a problem with the language interpretation and translation. We have to provide that where necessary, because it's not all the time that the traffickers are from the Caribbean or our own country, Jamaica, and so on. We do have to replace identification, and there are some victims straight out do not want to go through the entire process again. And so we are taking a full-fledged, and that's one of the criticism we saw, and we are working with it, full-fledged victim-centered approach, where you deal with trauma-informed training, where you deal with making sure that the person do not get re-victimized.
Yes.
And even Friday gone, I think another safe place where you can have the youngsters or persons victim come and they do not feel that everybody's hearing the business through a glass case or so, place where they can relax, and especially children, whether you try to play therapy or so on, in terms of how you can deal with it. We ourselves also have to be very careful as givers, whether they are social workers, counselors, or preparing the children for court, that we are sensitive, that we have compassion and we have empathy, because what those people would have gone through. And I'm glad it's a sort of early afternoon program and so on, because we have victims that have had persons sexual rape, sexual whatever, 10 persons, 16 persons, young people.
Yes.
So the whole question of victim-centered approach and trauma-informed, both for the social worker who is counseling and also for the victim, is a big, big challenge.
Yes. Just based on the picture that you've painted, I can see how many gears and different agencies would have to be collaborating for the process to be as streamlined and as supportive as we would want it to be, for sure. So we will be taking the break now. So what I'll ask is for you all to stay on. I know for Miss Ogilvy, I would want her to give us a little bit of information about the penalties that are under the Act. And I would also like us to discuss just briefly any additional things that we should look out for as persons who may be observing trafficking and not be aware of the fact that that is what we're observing. So we will wrap up that conversation when we come back from the break. Welcome back to Let's Talk Justice. We are having a discussion around trafficking in persons. I believe that is the correct term, but a lot of us call it human trafficking. And we are joined by several persons: Miss Budai from the Ministry of National Security, Mr. Thompson from the CPFSA, and Miss Ogilvy from the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions. So I wanted to pick up with you, Miss Ogilvy, as we talk about prosecuting these issues. Firstly, I wondered, how many of these cases are you seeing, just generally speaking? What kind of numbers are we looking at annually?
It's a bit difficult to say annually. It could be maybe about, if what we come across in our office, it could be about 2. But I believe since the enactment of the legislation, we've had about maybe that we have come across and have prosecuted about maybe 22 about 22, so most of which are child victims.
That was my next question. So you, over the time period that we would have had this legislation, you have, when we say prosecuted, do we mean cases where you were successful in convicting the person, or just generally the prosecution process?
Generally the prosecution process. So some we have prosecuted and a conviction had been secured. For some traffickers enter plea of guilt.
Yes.
And then there are some matters where we have had to either enter a nolle prosecute through the learned director of public prosecutions to conditionally end the matter upon availability of the witness or for some other reason. And then some matters we've had to offer either no evidence or no further evidence because we just don't have a witness.
I see. So essentially the number of prosecutions is not indicative as to the number of possible complainants or victims then?
Definitely. That is so.
What do you think are some of the challenges to persons being able to go forward with the matters?
As I had intimated earlier, fear. Some victims have become fearful, and I heard Ms. Bodai indicating also the length of time in which the matter is tried. And so even from Mr. Thompson, I find that victims become frustrated with the process. A matter could be put before the court from 2000 and maybe 18, 2017, and the witnesses just become frustrated and are no longer interested in giving evidence in the matter. So that's one of the main issues that we experience. It's securing the attendance of our victims. And we've had, even since recently, cases where it has had to come to an end because we just don't have a victim and we're unable to meet the requirements for the matter to be tried without the victim.
I see. Considering that so many of our victims are children, I heard you saying, Ms. Ogilvie, that it is the majority of the 22 matters that you would have seen that are children. I would ask to Mr. Thompson, what should we be looking out for to identify whether or not these persons are victims? And then, if we do notice any of these things, what should be our next step? Do we come to CPFSA? Do we go straight to the JCF? What guidance would you give us in that sense?
Before I jump into that, I want to say that one of the things that we use here at CPFSA, we refer to a low threshold of victim identification. So you heard about, right, the 22 cases that the DPP would have attempted to prosecutor would have been prosecuting, but there are others that don't get to that stage, but would have received services because we have identified either that they were victims or were victims of some other offense akin to trafficking. And perhaps you can't get a trafficking enough evidence for a trafficking prosecution, but the matter can be tried on the other pieces of legislation, right? Right. So there's that as well. Now it's not so easy to tell you that if you look for A, B, and C, you can detect that this is a victim of trafficking. But in the legislation there are really 3 points to prove. Well, for child victims, only 2 points really. One, that the child was being exploited, and that there was some activity that was involved in that exploitation, whether the child was recruited or the child was transferred or transported for the purpose of exploitation. But we usually tell the general public, look for children who, it's easy if you look for children who are working, especially working in adult establishments, children who are absent from school for extended periods of time. Look for children who are fearful, for example, of the adult who's supposed to be a trusted adult. So whether it's a caregiver, a parent, guardian, and some of these things are, what you see in general child abuse scenarios.
Yes.
So it's not so easy to say, look for this thing. But we just want the general public to be sensitive to, once you feel suspicious that this child is, as we say in Jamaica, somebody is taking disadvantage of the child. So the child is being taken advantage of,
Yes.
or the child is being used, or once you believe the child is being treated in, is being, ill-treated, report it. And you can report it by calling 211. And I say this because many of the instances in which a child has been identified as a victim of trafficking, the people who report did not know that they were reporting trafficking.
Yes.
They just knew that something was wrong
Mm-hmm.
and would have made a report. So we encourage the concerned citizens, once you see that there's something happening to a child, call 211. Or if you want, you can go to the nearest police station and make a report.
Okay, so we should be looking out for the same things that we would if we wanted to identify a child in need of care and protection. Great. So I appreciate that, Mr. Thompson. And the final thing I would want to ask before I ask everyone for their last words on the issue of trafficking in persons is penalties. And either Miss Ogilvy or Miss Budai can guide us in this sentiment. But what are the penalties that we're looking at, and are they different where the victim is a child? Are they different where the exploitation was sexual versus labor? So actually, I'll ask Miss Ogilvy to respond, and if Miss Budai has anything to add to what she gives us, feel free to do so.
Thank you. So the legislative framework is Trafficking in Persons Prevention, Suppression, and Punishment Act. 2007 when it was enacted, and then it was amended on several occasions thereafter, as you had intimated. Now, it was recently amended to prescribe 20 years imprisonment for offenses which involve, this is under this legislation, which involves victims. So that's 20 years which involves adult victims, but when it comes on to child victims, the penalty now goes up to 30 years for those type of offenses. Now, in respect of offenses, other related offenses under the legislation. And so there are other related offenses, for example, concealment. There is the concealment of or removing or withholding or destroying the travel documents of a victim. Mm-hmm. So those are victims who have been imported or who have traveled from other countries to Jamaica, as well as persons who facilitate trafficking in person. So you might not be the actual trafficker, but you facilitate the trafficking in persons, as well as receiving of a financial benefit from trafficking or conspiring with another trafficker. And then there's also another section that deals with criminalizing trafficking as it regards body corporate. These are companies. Mm-hmm. So those type of offenses that is the related offenses to the actual trafficking, the term of imprisonment is 10 years. They had removed the fines though. The government, when they had passed the amendments, removed the option of monetary fines in lieu of imprisonment as a penalty for convicted traffickers. Mm-hmm. And that came into effect in November of 2021. So there are, okay, yes, you were.
Yes, I would just want Miss Budai to just clarify for us why that amendment would have been made.
Mm-hmm. Oh, to remove the fines.
Yes.
Okay, that amendment was very important because remember now, traffickers are making a lot of money, billions of dollars across the world, and they have the money, and that, the fines wouldn't mean anything. That is not a punishment.
Right.
Okay.
That was I also wanted to add on before we go though, and it's important to note that traffickers may also be prosecuted under a number of other acts and regulations. Mm-hmm. So you're talking about, well, Dr. Warren talked about the Child Care and Protection Act. Mm-hmm. We also have the Sexual Offences Act, the offenses against the Persons Act, Proceeds of Crime Act that was mentioned by Mr. Gilvey, Cyber Crimes Act, the Pornography Yes, Labor Relations and Industrial Act and the Employment Termination and Redundancy Payment and the Employment Agency Amendment Act. So I want to say that what we have done is looking at a wider range and not limiting ourselves just to the trafficking in person prevention and suppression, right?
I just
Punishment.
wanted to ask you quickly, with those considerations, is there some effort in the ministry to kind of gather the data where persons are victims of trafficking, but the issue was brought under one of those pieces of legislation, so it did not end up with any of the offenses under the Trafficking in Persons Act? Is there some effort to gather those statistics, that data?
We have already done that, but that when you talk about some gaps and so on, we're seeing some gaps in terms of that. So we are dealing with the data. We are dealing with the MOU with data sharing now, and we're doing the reporting, and we're moving also because we know going to be dealing with the national policy, and you may have another program for us to look at the national policy, which is an accountability framework where we're going to be bringing now that we have to report to the public, report on a certain time, and come with a number of other strategic areas under the policy and the plan of action going forward.
Okay, thank you so much.
But I want to remind you, I don't know if Dr. Thompson didn't say, but one of our first guilty verdict under the traffic in Jamaica was under the Child Care and Protection Act for sale of children.
Oh, interesting. No, Dr. Thompson did not mention that, but I appreciate it.
Because Section 10 of the Child Care and Protection Act makes it an offense
Yes.
to want to sell a child or to traffic a child. And I know there was some amendment some time ago to harmonize the penalty under that section with what is in the Trafficking in Persons Act.
All right, great. So thank you all so much for joining us for this discussion. It's been really enlightening for us, and I'm sure for our listeners as well. And we are aware now that Dr. Thompson has informed us, if you see a child in need of care and protection, whether or not you think that is trafficking or some other issue, 211 is the number for you to call. And who knows, you may end up reporting a child that is being affected by trafficking. So I do want to thank you all for joining us. We do have one other segment of our show to go for today, some more topics for us to discuss. So we'll be moving into that segment now. We'll take the break and then we'll move into that segment.
Hi, welcome back to Let's Start Justice. Very, very good interview, Jade, with the guest that we had on. I think it's sobering because, and I liked how they highlighted that sometimes, and this happens in every jurisdiction, that when you want to pile on to get the sentences that fit the crime, you have to go to different pieces of legislation. So I'm happy that the guest mentioned the different pieces of legislation and, of course, the areas that require improvement. So very, very good interview. And I think it segues into a topic that JFJ and others have been calling for amendments to be made. Just last week, I saw a headline in the Gleaner. A 15-year-old boy was buggered, raped, and apparently the offender was charged with committing an act of buggery that carries a term of imprisonment, maximum term of 10 years. Now, the offense of rape carries a maximum term of life imprisonment. And clearly, if such an awful act is committed against a child, then that is certainly seen as an aggravating factor that would likely see a higher term being imposed. And just to clarify, there's a minimum term of 15 years that must be served for rape. And again, it goes up to life imprisonment. Now, when you look at what must have been such a traumatic experience for that 15-year-old boy, and to know that the sentence that would be imposed is the lesser one, which is buggery, maximum 10 years. What an injustice. What an injustice. And this is as a result, Jade, lack of political will.
You know, Mikkel, when this is a particularly close to my heart issue, especially over the months that we have been engaging with the public through our training sessions and such. When I explain what the effect of this section really is for our victims of sexual violence that are men and boys, people are shocked. People are
But they must shock
incensed.
themselves, Jade,
Incensed.
into self-accountability.
Absolutely.
Because we are the ones that basically make our parliamentarians
Absolutely.
lack this political will. Because we're so caught up in homophobia that we don't recognize that in law men and boys cannot be raped.
Yes.
We are the reason for it. And when persons hear us at JFJ get upset, when you have the Minister of Information and others come out and say buggery and so on won't be touched during the constitutional reform process, I want to break it down so you understand the implications of it.
Absolutely.
Several years ago, JFJ and other organizations wrote to parliamentarians. We held high-level policy dialogues. We went before the Joint Select Committee reviewing the Sexual Offences Act. And we recommended, please redefine rape in law. Because right now, it only speaks to penile vaginal penetration.
And even then, it only speaks to a female victim, even where that is
Yes.
the process.
And you know what the response was? And the recommendation report is there. I don't think we should touch this definition because it has implications for the buggery law.
Yes.
And because I recognize that my citizens are somehow homophobic, let's put this matter before a referendum,
Yes.
which in and of itself, that position is spineless. And we must call out every single parliamentarian who agreed to such nonsense. But what makes matters worse is that when you took such a spineless position, you come out and tell us that you won't be touching matters of buggery. I want you to let that soak in, you know. Let it soak in. So that is why every time I see a parliamentarian go on Twitter, you have to look at them differently. Where is the political will? And this is what we mean, Jade, by collective responsibility. Because they must stand up in a parliament and go against their political parties on matters such as this. You can bring forward a private member's motion. Let your dissent be known. At some point, we must stand for what is right. You know, just this morning, when you open the Gleaner, you go on the homepage, you see all the latest news.
Yes.
You go on it now. At least 2 more stories of buggery. Just this morning.
Mikkel, it is something that is consistently prolific. As our sexual violence numbers have increased, our numbers for buggery have increased. And I think we must also take the perspective to think we are not the only people that realize this gap. Offenders must realize it as well. Offenders must realize that they will
now,
encounter less consequences when they do certain acts versus others. And this is regardless of the victim, because even though we talk about buggery as it relates to men and boys in particular, where the victim is female, it is the same offense.
The same.
And it is the same sentence.
Lesser offense for an equally heinous crime.
Absolutely.
And, this segues into another issue that we're raising. Civic participation. Sometimes I have to be blunt for people to get it. The work that JFJ is doing, we're not funded to the level that we would want. Mm-hmm. You realize that Jade conducted that interview by herself because I had to attend to 2 emails from 2 prospective donors because we don't have much. This show that we invest in every week we come here, we have to find money for this show,
Yes.
Because while Bridge is good to give us the extra hour and perhaps charge us less, they can give us for free.
Absolutely
I haven't
not.
begged them yet, right? But we have to find the money because we invest. And this is why I mentioned even the community interventions earlier where the team was out. We invest in people knowing what the issues are and what their roles are in championing causes and holding the government accountable. So civic participation is key. And that's why sometimes when I have friends and so on who say they don't watch news, how dare you? You must know what's happening in the country. You must be upset about something. How else can you hold parliamentarians accountable? You can't just live so. Everything affects us. So we developed a little flyer, Jade, and I hope on social media we can share some of the things. Mm-hmm. You remember some of the areas that we're calling people to be aware of? What they must do?
Well, we want people to be aware of their right to their civic participation, people to be aware of the issues that might affect them, to be aware of how they can participate in our processes, so how you can make submissions, how you can make your opinion known through the media, the kind of access that you may have in that way. And also for us to just be informed.
Yes.
We need to know what is happening in order to form an opinion of it. And it's something that we've been championing even as we spoke about certain constitutional processes that are taking place. One of the things that we advocate for is for us as individuals to know what is happening. And if you don't know what is happening, let those who are responsible for you knowing know that you don't know. And you have to be involved in order to get that out of it.
Yes, absolutely. So just to close out, because I know you have the trivia to announce, I'm just hoping that even with the constitutional reform process, and I urge you to read Gordon Robinson's article. I don't have the time to go into it now, but apparently advocacy is now bullying. But for those who may be upset at advocacy, because sometimes you have to let your voices be known, but respectfully so, always. I urge you to, again, just keep up to date. The Ministry of Legal and Constitutional Affairs, the Permanent Secretary, Wayne Robertson, he promises me that he's going to be coming on the program as soon as possible, hopefully next week, because I would want him to just have dialogue with us, walk you through the process. Go get yourself registered to vote, because if you don't get registered to vote, you cannot participate in the referendum. So things like that he will speak to us about. So stay tuned. The Permanent Secretary is very receptive and quite engaging. So he will join us as soon as possible. But over to you, Jade.
Yes, so our trivia question was, when did Jamaica ratify the Palermo Protocol? And the response, the answer is the 29th of September 2003. Our winner is Saucy291, and you will receive your prize through Instagram DM. So you can look out for that later on.
Jade can send the people and go study it because some of them is something I don't know too, but I'm learning while I'm sitting
But
beside
that is
her.
the point. It is to learn, right?
So serious Googling.
Yes. But our Palermo Protocol is important. It is why we have our Trafficking in Persons Act, and so it is important for us to know where our obligations come from. So thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you to those persons who participated online.
And Vanessa, who is behind the scenes.
Absolutely, our producer at large. Behind the scenes,
and our
helping us
technical
to...
operator from Bridge as well.
Yes, thank you, Kevin.
All right, I'm Michael Jackson, Executive Director.
And I'm Jade Williams, and we'll see you next week. I don't know about the 2 hours, but definitely from 1 to 2, we will be here.
All right, take care all.
Jamaica.